Hello, it's News Focus on Love Plus. My name is Marshall Anthony Onoye. Welcome. Supreme Court has adjourned the hearing of an application filed by Emeka Ihedioha to review its judgment on the Imo State governorship election to the 2nd of March 2020. This comes after counsel to the former Governor Kanu Agabi requested for an adjournment to enable him regularize all processes. Counsel to Governor Hope Uzodinma said he has no objection. In the meantime, the Independent National Electoral Commission, INEC, had ruled out any fresh governorship election in South-South Bayelsa State as requested by the All Progressives Congress, APC. INEC's Director of Voter Education and Publicity, Oluwole Osaze Uzi, dismissed the APC's demand for a fresh governorship poll in Bayelsa State, South Nigeria. Well, he said the commission on Friday concluded its work on Bayelsa State governorship polls. The APC National Chairman, Adams Oshiomhole, had in this letter dated February 14, 2020, and addressed to the INEC Chairman Mahmoud Yakubu, called for a fresh election in Bayelsa State. On today's edition of News Focus, we'll be looking at we'll be examining Supreme Court's judgments of Imo State and Bayelsa State. To do that with me in the studio is a legal practitioner, socio-political affairs analyst. He is also an advocate for social justice, Nathaniel Ojobo. I hope I got that right.
Ojobo.
Ojobo.
Yes.
Nathaniel Ojobo, welcome to the studio.
Thank you very much, my pleasure.
Well, Nathaniel Ojobo is a legal practitioner, like I have said, an associate of the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators of the United Kingdom. He is also a human rights advocate, socio-political affairs analyst, and football analyst as well. Nathaniel heads the Lagos office of the Firma Advisory, a Nigerian law firm with its head office in Abuja and a presence in the United Kingdom. Well, we're not talking about international affairs today. We're talking about local affairs, Supreme Court judgment. There is Bayelsa and Imo State. First of all, I'll take you, would come from a retrogressive point, or rather, let's retrogress before today. Okay. We had the Supreme Court judgment upturning these two states' governorship polls. One was announced just a day before the governor was sworn in, while the other, the governor had sat and had begun work and familiarized himself with the people of Imo State, who turned out to say, look, we've accepted this man before the judgment was upturned. How did that news meet you?
Well, I mean, as a lawyer, I will be speaking as a lawyer, and as a lawyer, these things are expected, especially when you consider that it's part of the process to have courts meet up with demands of this nature. You know, people expect that the judiciary, being like they say, the last hope of the common man, will always make itself available to entertain applications of this nature, you know, and then look at the merits of them, and then eventually make out findings, give out judgments depending on what has been presented before it. So it is not strange to have such scenarios play out, especially as a lawyer. These are things that happen. And so there are possibilities, and they're expected. I wasn't surprised, not like I preempted anything, but then it's a possibility to have things come out the way they have turned out. Yeah, so.
Okay, given the antecedents in the election in these two states, the polls as announced, and the victory by these two political parties in Imo State, we had one political party which appears to be an opposition to the major ruling political party. And in Bayelsa State, the victory was gotten by the ruling party, the APC, and eventually seems to favor the opposition as well. So when the Imo State, which came first, came and greeted the public, there was public outcry. I mean, there was question regarding the resolution of the Supreme Court and how it got to that. And the public saw it as the ruling party, APC, or the federal government, as led by President Muhammadu Buhari, having a hand, so to speak, in the Supreme Court judgment, only for Mary Odili to come up with hers just a few days down the line, and this seemed to favor the PDP. It didn't seem to balance up. It didn't seem to balance. As much as you have said, when you're in legal practice, you would have several interpretation, misrepresentation, misinterpretation, and reinterpretation, and these kind of events would happen. What is there for the common man? What is there for the man on the street who's looking at all of these play out and say, look, is this politics going on? You know, can't our votes count? We've voted, the results been announced. Can't we just hold on to this power?
Okay, you know, the thing about elections are that, like I said earlier, it doesn't just end with casting votes during election dates. And so it goes beyond all of that. You know, part of having a democratic society is entrenching a judicial system that will get to appreciate the idea of democracy. Democracy doesn't just run on its own. It's not a one-way traffic. There are other bodies that will also aid, or that have been set up to aid, the free flow and operation of democracy, one of which is the judicial system. And as much as you might have all of these outbursts by individuals, you know, groups, and then political parties here and there, people with their various interests coming up to say, okay, this wasn't right, this was wrong, what the Supreme Court has done is this and that. The truth of the matter remains that, like you have rightly observed, some of these decisions have favored the ruling party, some have been against them. You look at not just Imo and Bayelsa, you look also at Jigawa State, where it was the APC that had the sway of things, you know. But all of a sudden, the Supreme Court again gave a decision, of course upholding the decision of the Court of Appeal regarding that state, by saying that all positions occupied by the APC were to be, or rather the APC was to vacate all the seats it occupied in that state, and then the party that came second in the elections was going to take over. You know, so these are a part of the things we expect, you know, we should expect as a people, as part of the polity. I mean, this is not to deny the fact that there might be a few discrepancies in terms of suspicion about whether some of these things have been done properly or not. I mean, the process will also entail some of these issues. This is not me trying to validate any of these things that people have laid their concerns about. But then the truth remains that as part of any democracy, some of these things will happen. But it is not for us to always make constructions, permutations, and try to attach political, you know, inclinations to these things. Yes, we are all political beings, but then we must not always make attachments of whatever the court comes up with, you know, to bring up issues of politics into the judgment of courts. And so for me, I think what the Supreme Court has done, I mean, I might be limited by virtue of my position as a lawyer not to make comments, because some of these matters, in fact, 3 of the matters as per the Zamfara, Imo, and then the Bayelsa matters, are currently before the Supreme Court for review. And so my comments on them will be limited, because I am not to make, by virtue of my training as a lawyer, I am not to make comments of matters before a court. And so I might be limited, but the truth of the matter, like I have said before now, is when courts give judgments in this manner, it is for us to, especially when the apex court has given a judgment, you know, we are not to go beyond or out of our way exactly and then make unnecessary permutations. The judgment has been given. It might not favor some persons, but then we just have to accept it as it is while awaiting the review of the Supreme Court on some of these matters.
Okay, so that we can have very objective analysis, and these analysis, as much as we would get your professional input, would also like to, you know, drop your professional cap and put on your Nigerian cap and, you know, speak as a Nigerian. And that would also be noted that you're speaking from personal point of view, not a professional point of view, so we can distinguish one from the other. Today's sitting for the review of the ruling of the Supreme Court, take us through that. Take us through a summary of that, and then would go into your opinion on how it pans, because we see there's an adjournment already.
Oh,
but
yes.
Nigerians were on their seats waiting to hear a resolution coming from that sitting. Take us through the summary for today.
Okay, so as we are all aware, the parties that have felt aggrieved as a result of the Supreme Court's judgments as per the Imo and Zamfara elections, and recently the Bayelsa elections, have all approached the court, that is the same Supreme Court, to see how it can review its decision if possible. And by virtue of legal principles, the Supreme Court has the power to review its decision, especially if that decision or those decisions have been given in error, if there has been a manifest injustice occasioned by such judgments. The Supreme Court can revert back, take a look at how or what informed its previous decisions, and then come about with a better, decision on the subject matter. And so, because these people who the judgment of the Supreme Court did not favor have felt aggrieved, they have tabled out or written out some of the items that they feel the Supreme Court ought to have considered initially, and then also made out those points so that the Supreme Court can reconsider its position. And so what they have done is simply in consonance with what the law allows. Even though, of course, it is also the law that the Supreme Court cannot sit on its own judgment in terms of having to, sit as an appellate body on its own judgment. But then the process of review is one that is made available by the law. And so what they have done is simply to approach the court. And like I mentioned earlier, as much as I should be speaking as a Nigerian like you had beseeched me to, but then I wouldn't be refusing making comments as to the totality of what all of these applications about, just because I am a lawyer. By virtue of being a Nigerian as well, I shouldn't be making permutations of what the decision of the Supreme Court will be as per all of these applications. But one thing I'm going to say about all of this is that the applications are before the court already. Yesterday, I think that of Imo State and Zamfara State came up, and the court adjourned. You had mentioned the reasons earlier, which are quite apt in the circumstance. And so we are waiting to hear what the decision of the Supreme Court will be as to whether it will review these decisions to favor the persons that have applied, or the various apparatuses that have applied or not. And so we are waiting to see what the Supreme Court will say in the circumstance.
Okay, I would have asked what your thoughts would be, what your
predictions.
Not necessarily predictions, but as the pendulum swings, you could tell what side it could swing to, but that would be preemptive, if you may, as a professional lawyer.
Well, yes, and then I should mention that I should have mentioned this earlier, but then since I still have the opportunity, I guess I should still just say it. Okay. And so the Supreme Court can only review its decision on, like I had mentioned earlier, in a case where manifest injustice has been occasioned by its earlier position. And another instance where the Supreme Court can review its decision is where, for example, the court gave or made a judgment or gave a judgment without jurisdiction. So in such a case, of course, I shouldn't assume that every Nigerian knows this, but then in the climes of law, a court cannot, go out of its way, especially when it doesn't have the jurisdiction, cannot give a decision on a matter when it doesn't have jurisdiction.
But what jurisdiction will be called to question in this case, where it's the Supreme Court? And having gone through all the levels of the legal strata, and then you get to the Supreme Court, is there a restriction of jurisdiction?
Well, of course not. That is not even in the picture in this case. I was only just giving an example as to some of the instances upon which the Supreme Court can, entertain and give heed to an application for it to review its decision. So those are some of the instances where manifest injustice has been caused, of course, by its earlier position, where it didn't have jurisdiction and it still went ahead to give, judgment in the matter and all of that. So in such instances, the Supreme Court can always review its decision. So we are waiting, like I said earlier, we can only but hold until the judgment of the Supreme Court, or rather the ruling of the Supreme Court on these applications have been made out by the court itself.
You're an associate of the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators of the United Kingdom. We've had international organizations and international organizations call out the Nigerian government, the ruling APC as led by President Muhammadu Buhari, and asking it to not interfere or to reduce its interference with matters of the law or matters of the rule of law. And then here we have the judgment by the Supreme Court sacking a sitting governor on grounds that the people had felt were not justifiable enough, as well as these international organizations. And they've called us out, as a government, severally on several grounds. What do you think a continuous proclamation of the stance, as it were, of the Supreme Court in sacking these two governors would portend before the international communities and these organizations, international organizations that have called out Nigerian government as the current administration? What do you think it will portend for us as a country if the Supreme Court continues to say, look, this was our ruling and this is what we stand by and we're going with it? On the flip side of it, what also would it portend if the Supreme Court gets to upturn its ruling and say, look, okay, for XYZ reasons, we think we should upturn the judgment and let these parties or let these people continue to stay?
Okay. Internationally, I am not sure any country. Nigeria is a sovereign entity. We have established organizations of states that can run our affairs independent of, external influence. And so the Supreme Court is the apex court as far as Nigeria is concerned, as much as some of these foreign countries and external bodies.
Let me cut it here, so you can. I don't let you stray too far away and then get to come back to this. Okay. Yes, Nigeria is a sovereign country. Yes, we wouldn't expect the international organizations to come and make the rulings for us. We wouldn't expect the President of the United States or the Chairman of the United Nations to come sit down on the Supreme Court panel and make a ruling. Yeah, but we've seen reactions from the international community. We've seen international organizations begin to sit to call out Nigerian government. We've seen, in fact, recently it's been averred that the partial ban on immigration.
The justices of the Supreme Court and their family members not to go to the United States anymore.
That is a proposal.
Okay.
Not yet implemented. Okay. That's a proposal. But the already implemented partial ban for citizens of Nigeria to the United States who are intending to immigrate to the United States, has been partially harped or blamed on the interference of the Nigerian government in the matters of the rule of law. We've had that opinion, So the question is not to say that if the Supreme Court should continue, there might be a counter-reaction from for instance, the President of the United States coming to say, this is the ruling, and this is what the people want, and this is what we'll know. But what kind of reactions should we expect from them that could affect the larger population of Nigeria, given the action or the inaction as perceived by these organizations of this current administration on the matters of rule of law?
I was just going to say that before, the interruption. Like I said earlier, I still maintain my initial position that when it comes to the international level, as against the position our courts will make out, or has made out and will make out eventually in these matters, it is our sole prerogative to do as for our courts to do as they deem fit, especially in line with the dictates of the law. And so it's not really for any country to decide, any external, country to decide to either associate with us or to put stiff sanctions on us because the Supreme Court of Nigeria has decided to give a decision in one way or the other. It's not for any country to, make out a position on that. I mean, when it comes to the issue of, sanctioning Nigeria, some banning Nigerians from immigrating to the United States, that could as well be on other reasons, but then not on the reason as to the position that the Supreme Court has taken. The court is an organ of state, and so the court can make a decision as it deems fit, especially in line with the dictates of the law and of justice. But then, like you had mentioned, I want to think the idea of sanctioning or banning Nigerians from going into America as immigrants now is not on the basis of what we have done or what our courts have done and held. It would rather be, as I think, on the basis of antecedents, the alleged, corrupt practices that Nigerians over there in America have been found, to be engaged in, and things like that.
Well, that wasn't mentioned, and I beg to differ because even looking at organizations that are currently proposing to the American Congress and for a ban on persons or actors that are perceived to affect negatively the exercise of the rule of law or activities relating to the rule of law in the negative, calling for the ban of these officers, these personalities, and their families and other actors relating to these people, from getting into the United States. Nothing was said about. In fact, they had even promoted the Nigerians, the very many Nigerians who emigrate to the United States, and saying that, look, the majority of Nigerians in the United States who are eventually affected by this partial ban on immigrants who are willing to come to the United States from Nigeria are not those that would bring about the security concerns that the United States has. They have even proposed to the United States government itself to upturn that ban. So I would not take sides with you on that to say that it was blamed or harped on the security issue, or not security issues, corruption. Yeah, you said corruption, antecedents of Nigerians over there.
If I may.
But hold your thoughts. We'll come back and we'll continue this. Whether it leads to a rancor or it leads to a banter, we'll come back after this break. All we have to do is ask our viewers to stay tuned, and News Focus would continue. Nathaniel, who's a legal practitioner, will be back with us.
Life has many chapters, full of moments, full of pages. But before you turn that next page, find out how it was written and how it can be rewritten as Pastor Chris introduces you to the laws of the Spirit that create moments in your life.
There are too many questions that man has no answers to. The reason is this: man is a spirit. And because man is a spirit, he must participate in the realm of the spirit.
So, write the story of your life with the Word of God, because life is spiritual. Life is Spiritual, a brand new release by Pastor Chris, now available on DVD and other video, audio, and downloadable formats. To order, please call the following numbers, or you can download on mobile at the Pastor Chris Digital Library app. Are you interested to know the importance of your words? How to activate the creative power in your words? How to say the right thing at the right time? Find out in this insightful masterpiece by Pastor Chris. Discover the principle of creation and recreation.
If you're going to live the true life that God has given to you, you must line up with the Word of God. This is where the ministry of the Spirit of God is indispensable, because it's the Spirit that actually knows the codes. Hear this. You can't just prophesy. So you're going to prophesy as He commands you. You need the code. God, I need the sound code. I need the sound code. Hallelujah. Hallelujah! I need the sound code. Once you have the sound code and you hit it, creation will respond to you. Glory to God!
Tap into the wealth of divine principles and live in the future of your dreams as you learn the workable principle of sound code and the Spirit. This message is now available on DVD in a 2 volumes and 4-part series. To place your order, kindly call the following numbers now showing on the screen, or you can visit www.christembassyonlinestore.org or download through the Pastor Chris Digital Library app, available on Google Play Store and Apple iStore. You will be glad you did.
The Bible says, "The wicked shall be a ransom for the righteous." But why are the righteous destroyed with the wicked? How could a nation be held bound by corruption? When is the right time to stop interceding? Will you be that agent of change in your nation? Find out your responsibility as an intercessor and how to exercise dominion in your intercession.
This is God's Spirit bringing this message to you. It's a timely message for you. Doesn't matter which country, which city you're in. It's timely for you today.
The Power of Intercession is a 2-part audio by Pastor Chris, and it's available for download at the Pastor Chris Digital Library app on Google Play Store and Apple App Store. Also available on audio CD and MP3 format. You can call the numbers now displayed on your screen to order your copies. God bless you.
Welcome back. It's still News Focus, and we're still talking with Nathaniel Ojobo, legal practitioner, socio-political affairs analyst, and he's also a member of the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators of the United Kingdom. And together we were examining the Bayelsa State, the Supreme Court ruling on Bayelsa State and Imo State. As we do know, the Supreme Court adjourned the hearing of an application filed by Emeka Ihedioha of Imo State to review his judgment on the governorship election to the 2nd of March 2020. And the Independent National Electoral Commission has also ruled out any fresh governorship election in South Bayelsa State as requested by the APC. That was anticipated, whether or not, based on the calls from the chairman of the APC, that's the APC, Adams Oshomole, in a letter dated February 14th, requesting the INEC to conduct a fresh election in Bayelsa State. Now, people said, look, you had a question you were going to, I had asked,
yes,
and because I had countered what you said.
Of course.
Well, because I was going to come from Adam Soshomole, and people said, look, you know, you didn't cry foul in Imo State. Why are you crying foul here? I would have wanted your opinion on that, but
maybe
let's
I should
go.
take the question, the answer to that question first before I come to this then.
Okay, go ahead, please.
Okay, so I mean, regarding the question that was posed to me just before we went on, just before we went on the break, the truth will be that, I mean, it's not for me or anybody to deny that the current government of Nigeria has not flouted several court orders. And of course, it would be foolhardy for anybody to say that all of such actions will not have a negative influence on Nigeria internationally.
Okay.
I mean, it's not for anybody to deny that.
Good.
And I wouldn't even encourage anyone to, because you'd only be, you know, playing a very tough game. And so for me, all of those have negative effects on Nigeria internationally, especially when you consider that Nigeria is signatory to a lot of international conventions that bind on Nigeria and all of that. So one would expect the country to live up to its billing in terms of obeying court orders and all of that. But severally, we've had this government flouting, you know, court orders, and then the Attorney General will come say to you that they have the power to so do to protect national interest and all of that. But then, I mean, going further will mean deviating from the original topic of today's discussion. So I think we should leave it at that. Internationally, all of such actions by the government of this country has led to very negative consequences. And I wouldn't be surprised, even though it was not made apparent by the government of the United States that that was the reason why they have put up this ban against Nigerians coming to America. But then I wouldn't be surprised if that is stated as one of the reasons. In fact, I verily believe that that is the focal reason behind that idea from the American government.
Oh, beautiful.
You know.
Okay. So Adams Oshomole crying foul now, what do you make of it? Nigerians said you didn't cry foul in Imo State. Why are you crying foul in the Bayelsa State?
I mean, it's typical of Nigerian politicians to do that. You know, I was having a discussion with a friend just a few days ago after the delivery of the judgments of the apex court in the Bayelsa elections, and of course, upon Oshomole's outburst. It's very funny how these things happen. When it's in your favor, you give kudos, you make public speeches praising and hailing the Supreme Court. But when it's against you, you say all manners of things. And Nigerians, especially the political class, actually need to get themselves bred, properly bred when it comes to this kind of things. You mustn't expect judgment in your favor at all times. It can't work that way. The judiciary will not do your bidding. That's why they are the judiciary, and that's why they are considered the last hope of the common man. If they keep doing your bidding, then that means it's no longer state apparatus. It's not your property. You have to understand that it can't always be in your favor. What guides their activities and judgments is the dictate of the law, or rather are the dictates of the law, and not what you desire to be, you know, what they would eventually make out as their judgment. And so for me, I think Oshomole's outburst is clearly misconceived. It is one which is not known at law. You cannot write a letter to, I mean, one would expect that these people have, you know, legal advisors to advise them before they come out to publicly say these things. You cannot write a letter to INEC saying to INEC to conduct a fresh election. I mean, on what basis would you be doing that? As not even the president of Nigeria can write such a letter or make such demands. And so you are just a political chieftain, and you should know the boundary within which you're to operate, not to write a letter to INEC. And INEC's response is quite apt to have responded that they are not inclined or obliged to heed to such. They are only obliged to heed to the judgment of the Supreme Court, and which is what they have done. And so Oshomole's outburst, or whatever it is that he has said, is clearly misconceived and does not have any place in fact and in law. The judgment of the Supreme Court still stands, and except upon the application to review same is reviewed as against what they had earlier decided. But as we speak, the judgment of the Supreme Court stands, and not even a letter from the number one citizen to INEC to do otherwise will have any effect.
Objectively, you have spoken about how things like this can play up in the matters of law, where judgments can go in favor or otherwise of an individual or a political party. We have also seen that in Imo State, the people seem to be against the ruling of the Supreme Court judgment in the removal of Emeka Ihedioha, given the series of protests that had, you know, engulfed the state since the removal of the governor, or the removed governor, if I may put it that way. Since his removal, it's been difficult to peg a tag to him, peg a name or title to him, tag a title to him. If he was former governor, or you don't want to call him a former governor.
Well, you wouldn't call him, if you look at the judgment of the court, you wouldn't call him a former governor, because what the judgment of the Supreme Court has done is to say he shouldn't have even been there in the first place. And so he cannot be regarded as a former governor. What he did was to, well, his occupation of that office by virtue of the Supreme Court's judgment is as though he never occupied it. And so Hope Uzodimma's tenure, or Hope Uzodimma as he stands, is regarded as the governor of the state, and not, what's his name again? Exactly. So whatever Emeka had occupied at that time is deemed not to have even been in effect. You know, so that's that on that.
So, given the people's reaction in recent times, you tell that they were in support of this man who had interimly occupied that seat as the governor. And we saw what played out in the case of PDP Atiku versus INEC Buhari, and INEC Buhari in the Supreme Court. People there was so much hope in the camp of the PDP. They felt they had all the arsenals, and from all that we saw, being fed to the people, so much propaganda from both parties, and people watched the event and incidents keenly to see the outcome. And very disappointing as that was for the people of the PDP, Nigerians still expected some sort of move like we have seen in this case, where the Supreme Court was called to review and give another final verdict eventually, as it would be. But we didn't see that coming from the Atiku camp. Do you think that they didn't envisage the kind of power they could wield if they had ordered or if they had requested a review of that judgment, or there wasn't any room at all? Because Nigerians are asking if the Supreme Court could be asked to review and actually accept to sit down to review, why didn't we have an Atiku with all the arsenals they had in their kitty call for a review of that judgment?
Okay, so there are two things involved in answering this question. The first would be the perspective of the lawyers representing a particular party. And so their perspective might be that there is no chance for them to have a review in their favor. As lawyers, we are always encouraged by virtue of our practice rules to always go ahead with advising clients on the facts of their case. I mean, there are times the facts of one's case. This is not me saying it couldn't have as well been in the favor of Atiku to have gone for a review. I mean, with doing the counsel or the lawyers to Atiku doing their homework well, and of course considering the fact if it favored them, anything is possible. We have seen that happen over time. Maybe not at the level of the presidential, seats or the presidential election, but we have seen it turn out in several situations as per gubernatorial elections. And so, I mean, it could have as well been possible at the presidential level. But then, like I was saying, the fact remains that the lawyers and the legal representatives to Atiku might have as well considered the impossibility of getting, a final judgment in their favor through a review of the judgment that had been given by the Supreme Court. And so that may have as well informed the decision not to go ahead with a review. Of course, I'm aware that, or rather, I think they ought to have been aware, especially being senior lawyers, that the option of a review was open for them, but then deciding not to use or toe that path, of course, may have been as a result of their feeling that there stood no chance with getting a favorable result through a review. And so that may have as well been the reason why they didn't take that path. And then talking about, the outcry, the outburst by what you have impliedly said to be a majority of the people in Imo State, that is understandable. I was discussing with someone, like I mentioned earlier, and I told the person that, look, in all of this gubernatorial election saga, the one I consider to be most controversial is that of Imo State. And the reason is simple, a situation where, and I think with the greatest respect to the apex courts of the country, I think that is about the only case where the application for review of the judgment of the Supreme Court is most apt. And the reason is simple. This is because of the fact that the results, as it stands, as we speak, what the Supreme Court has done, or the implication of what the Supreme Court has done in that matter, is to say the number of voters can be lesser than the number of votes, and an election will be properly conducted in that manner. What I mean to say is voters can be more than the number of those registered as voters in a particular vicinity, and it will be fine. And I mean, ordinarily, that shouldn't be the case. The worst or the best, the highest it can get to ordinarily should be that the number of votes should equate with the number of voters in a particular vicinity. That is what should happen. But then from findings, the calculations and all of that, what has happened is to say that the number of votes amassed by the APC, the PDP, and every other party is now much more, not just by a small number, but a high magnitude of votes, much more than the number of registered voters in Imo State. And I mean, what else would one do in such a situation than ask the Supreme Court to take a look at this decision to see if there's room for a review? You know, like I said...
One would begin to wonder, aren't these learned colleagues of yours?
Well, lawyers have a way of, I mean, just like each human being, we are different.
We have
different
of
perspectives.
turning the laws.
Well, not
rules.
exactly. But the truth of the matter is we have different perspectives to issues. Just like it's not just a thing about lawyers. People have their perspectives to issues. Some might be mischievous, some might be real. It's not for us to say which is mischievous or not.
We're winding down on time, but I want to take this question very quickly. I wouldn't want to lose it out. Like I did advocate for you to drop your legal cap, your lawyer personality, and let us bring Nathaniel Ojobo, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, into the studio, and let's have your thoughts. Do you think, as a person, not as a lawyer, do you think the popular notion, there is any credit to the popular notion that the APC is trying to make inroad to the Southeast, where it has little or no political presence, given the majority of the ruling political party in that area, and given the population it could get from Imo State, especially when making projections for 2023, that Imo State is pivotal, and that might have warranted an influence by the APC on the Supreme Court to have attained that judgment in Imo State. Do you think there is any atom or semblance of truth in that?
Okay, before I go ahead with answering that question, I would want to clearly, object to a line of thought in the question to
Please,
say
feel
that
free to object.
The APC might have influenced, the judgment of the Supreme Court. Like I said, it is not for me to sit here and deny that these things are not possible. Not that they don't happen. I can't say to you whether they happen or not. I mean, I've been part of court proceedings as a lawyer. I've seen things. But then it is not for me to say here that influence occurred from the APC on the judges of the Supreme Court to come up with that decision. But then, what I can say to you is that as a citizen of Nigeria, it is only normal for the APC to want to use all means, legal means now, to see how they can capture the South. Because apparently, like you have mentioned,
all politically legal, all legal, political, or political, legal.
Exactly,
means.
to do whatever they need to do to capture the South. Apparently, the South is not in their hands as we speak. And then, of course, for you to be able to wield, substantial influence all over the country, you should be able to have a majority or some sort of influence on virtually every part of the country.
Especially the Southeast.
Well, yes, of course.
Where you have little or no support coming for the ruling administration currently right now. Nathaniel Ojobo, it's my first time having you on the set, and I'm sure that we'll be seeing more of you in subsequent editions of News Focus.
As much as time and chance permits.
And I sincerely do hope that you will not politically avoid answering certain questions and coming on with your legal caps. Otherwise, I'll just shift you to my colleague who runs a legal talk show, because on News Focus, we would like to examine all the sites and all the facts and like to get the pulse as you feel it.
Oh, yes, of course. I mean, that's part of what it means to be a responsive and responsible citizen.
I want to say thank you very much for coming to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
And to all our viewers who stayed and tuned into the show, remember to go to our website, www.loveuploss.tv, and on the comment section, leave a comment. Tell us your thoughts about what you've seen on the program today. Feel free to also talk about any other program you're watching currently on Love Plus and you want to make a comment on. Also go to the Google Play Store, Apple App Phone Store to download our app, Love Plus, on your PC, mobile phones, other internet-enabled devices, and get to watch us on the go. Join us same time next week as we bring you another interesting edition of News Focus. Until then, I still remain Marshall Anthony Onoye. God bless you.